Welcome everybody to the Distorian Lounge. This is the Kate-only version of Distory with Kate and Kirk. My name is Kate, aka the Disney Cicerone, and I like to talk about obscure Disney history with a dash of encouragement. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We have some really fun obscure history, obscure Distory for you guys tonight, specifically from Disneyland, because I thought, hey, Kirk is away this week and he'll be back next week, but while he's away, Kate will play and get to choose her own topic. So we're going to talk about the unique history of West Center Street in Disneyland. Now, I have talked a lot about East Center Street in the past on various episodes and various content and things that I make. We talked about the art corner. They had some street art that went on there that now showed up in a sign in Walt Disney World that you can see the art festival that's there. And a few other things that happened on that street back in the day. But we're going to talk about the other side of the street, which is West Center Street. For those of you who don't know, Main Street has both East and West Center Street, which is in the center. There's also Town Square that's lower down, and then there's East and West Plaza Street. So there's a couple cross streets that go with Main Street USA. So we're going to talk about West Center Street, which is on this side over here. And that is where Walt Disney World doesn't have a version of that anymore because the Emporium ate it, so it doesn't exist anymore. But let's give a little bit of context before we dive into the Center Street. Let's talk about what Walt Disney wanted for Main Street USA just briefly. And so I have a great quote from him that says, "For those of us who remember the carefree time it recreates, Main Street will bring back happy memories. For younger visitors, it's an adventure in turning back the calendar to the days of their grandfather's youth." Now, for us today, it would be like great-grandfather, because now we've stepped forward a few generations, right? But there's so much I could say about Main Street USA. We would be here for eons. So I'm really going to try to focus myself in here. And we're going to talk about the stores a little bit. One thing that I've researched recently is a lot of like the building construction era of Disneyland, as well as animation. I've kind of been in two camps with my research, but the store size was really interesting because if you've ever been to Disneyland and gone in those stores, they are teeny tiny. They are very, very small, except for like parts of the Emporium are a little bit larger, but it's so tiny. And I was always wondering, is it just because Walt wanted Main Street to be pony-sized? He wanted to be 5/8 and kind of like a smaller scale so that it would be more charming. So he made all of the stagecoaches like that. All the Main Street vehicles are a little smaller. Everything you see obviously uses that forced perspective that people have talked about it ad nauseum. So I won't bore you about the forced perspective aspect. But an interesting thing was Walt Disney was researching Disneyland. When he was researching Disneyland, he visited John Gostovich, who is the general manager of the Los Angeles Farmers Market. And so John suggested that the shops for Disneyland be made small and on a single level so they don't be two-story. He said people will go in a small store with people in it because it looks crowded, which I thought was really interesting. This was also logic that they used in Disneyland in the beginning. They wanted, C.V. Wood's advice was to let them see people are in line in all of the various rides, because if people are in line, people will think this must be a good ride because people are waiting for it. And then they'll want to pay their ticket or their money to go on that ride. So that's why in the beginning, a lot of the rides were lines. You would see them very visibly on the outside of the attraction. That was C.V. Wood's advice. Later, I think Walt Disney really shifted to wanting to hide the lines behind like a facade. And that was because that they did that at Knott's Berry Farm. So that was something that he got from Knott's Berry Farm, was the idea of like, oh, maybe we could like make some themed queues and hide the lines a little bit. But in the beginning of Disneyland, they were very, very visible. And that was because of C.V. Wood, who didn't get along with Walt Disney very much. And he also was a bit of a crook. So that is what it is. But that was just a little bit of a note on the store size before we launch into what is here on the unique history of West Center Street in Disneyland. So where are we going to go first on West Center Street in Disneyland? We're going to head to the flower market, which is one of my favorite things that I'm so sad we don't have anymore. And Disney, if you are listening, please, 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 how amazing would it be for Disneyland locals to be able to go to Disneyland and buy fresh flowers at the end of the night to like take home for their house and like have them be like Disney flowers? Like, how amazing would that be? Because there's so many locals that go there all the time and they go after work and they have dinner and things. Like, that would be amazing. So, and it would also be a throwback to this flower market, which we only have a little bit of. So let me back up. The flower market showed up, some people say it's 1957. So Disneyland opened 1955. This was a couple years after. The pictures that I have on this West Center Street, you can see what it looked like before. This is a nice picture of the restrooms at the end of the street. But you can see that there was not anything on this street here. It was pretty plain Jane. And I think that somebody said it was 1957, but I really think all the pictures that I have seen, it comes up in 1959, which makes so much more sense because it was kind of like a relaunch of Disneyland in 1959 when they did the Matterhorn and they did all the Tomorrowland upgrades and everything. So from the pictures I've seen and the dates that are on them, it seems to me it was more 1959 is when the flower market started. So you can see this is what it looked like before. I think this is 1956 in this one. And you can see that woman in some period costume, but definitely nothing there next to the Carnation Company, which is ice cream shop at that point. So the flower market looks like this. And it's one of my favorite places to look at pictures from because there's always like ladies in really pretty dresses from the day. So, and these flowers were not real flowers, though. These flowers were all solid fake plastic flowers. If you think of in the early 1960s, people didn't really think of artificial flowers as cheap like we do today. Some people call them like maybe tacky or like, but that it was novel because plastics were new back then. So to have these flowers that would stay fresh forever, I mean, they were pretty spectacular. And they were in all different colors. They were shiny, bright, and new, and everyone had plastic flower arrangements in their home, so it made sense to get them at Disneyland as a souvenir. The nice restaurants also had them on every table back in the day, and Disneyland pretty much had every possible variety in the flower market on West Center Street. So you can see all the different varieties of them, and they just covered the street in the beginning. You can tell when Walt was still alive what this flowers look like on Center Street, because you can tell that he was kind of like either him or his wife, either one or both. They paid attention to it to make sure that it kind of stayed really full. Something they also had after a while was fruit, but it wasn't real fruit. This was like plastic or wax fruit, and they had a whole bunch of it there. You can see it looks like it's some sort of, I think it's a pineapple for $1.95. And I want to say that's maybe a pear or an apple for 19 cents. This was like the photo op you did when you went to Disneyland, is you would go to the flower market and get your picture taken. So they did not have any real flowers in this. It was all artificial everything because plastics were so new. And it was a souvenir too, so people could take it home and it would stay fresh forever, and they were really durable. So they also had flower arrangements, baskets, and little miniature flower carts also for sale. But very, very vibrant colors in this as well, because they weren't natural flowers, but just really beautiful. Here's some flower baskets for you guys. Over time, though, you'll see as I scroll through these pictures that these start to get a little bit sparser as time goes on. The flowers maybe don't get a little bit as full, or there's less of them, but they do have these like flower carts that you can see. They were almost always there the entire time. This one I really love, because it's got a tower of grapes in it. So then even more time goes by and you see now they have this it's just getting very, very sparse in the flower market. And so what eventually happens here is the Carnation Cafe seating area expands because it was on the side. And as it expands, it kicks the flower market. In the 70s, it kicks it over to the other side. Now this photo is really fun because this is actually from one of my Disney Cicerone followers who sent this to me. This is their dad in this plaid leisure suit, which just makes me really happy. Carnation Cafe expanded. It kicked the flower market across the street. So now this is East Center Street with the flower market in it. And you can see it's really, it's still pretty sparse. It's definitely not as impressive as it was, but the color's there. Over time, what happened to East Center Street was they stopped selling flowers in the flower market altogether. So if you go there today, however, this is a modern photo, you'll see there's a little trellis that says flowers, and there are a couple of wagons in the back that have artificial flowers on them. And you know what I found really interesting that I didn't know before I started studying this was, those of you who go to Disneyland often know that you can get the first pickle of the day. You can get like a button for getting the first pickle of the day from this little like fruit cart that's in the front. And that fruit cart, I think, represents all that plastic and artificial fruit that was in the market across the street. And that's why it's there, which makes so much sense. So I always wondered why they have this kind of random pickle cart in this kind of odd location. And I think that is why. Yeah, fun little Distorian's Lounge find for why those things are the way they are on East Center Street now, but used to be on West Center Street. So the other thing that we have on West Center Street is the Carnation delivery truck. Now, this was another thing that virtually everybody got their photo taken in this truck. It's kind of reminds me, if you go to Toontown in Disneyland, how everybody sits in the fire engine there and they get their photo taken. Same kind of thing. It was like the photo op. And so this truck was was there from 1955 to 1997. It was around. It was the 1910 design Ford Model T. The wheels on the Model A chassis. So it's a little hybrid of a Ford Model T and a Model A. This was parked on West Center Street, but was built using Bob Gurr's drawings and by Carnation workmen at Carnation's Atwater Village plant near Glendale. So it was created for Disneyland. It's not like all the Main Street vehicles were created by Bob Gurr with modern parts in it so they would be able to fix them if they needed to. So you can see I have lots and lots of pictures of people doing this photo op inside this Carnation Milk Company, which is basically promoting the milk and the ice cream that's next door in the shop. So the original function was this was going to be a working truck to bring products from backstage to Main Street each morning and then be parked as a sort of billboard for the rest of the day. So Bob Gurr, as he put it, he said an early sponsor of Disneyland was the Carnation Milk Company. They wanted to have an antique delivery truck parked on Main Street right in front of their Carnation ice cream parlor. Walt had me design an antique-looking truck, which Carnation built right in their own truck maintenance shop in Glendale. And he based the design on a modern 1931 Model A Ford chassis. A friend made a custom radiator emblem for it, naming the truck Gurrmobile, which if you do Distory with us very often, you've heard of Gurrmobile before. I used to get a kick out of know-it-all guests who would tell others how they remember the old Gurrmobiles that were built in Los Angeles long ago. For years, it served as a photo-op prop in front of the ice cream parlor. When folks would take each other's photo seated in the cab, behind them would appear the words Carnation Milk. Clever publicity. So now we got to see that. So you can see inside, right above their heads, would be Carnation Company. So very, very clever advertising as they show all of their vacation photos and slides to their friends, right? This Carnation truck had a really interesting history with Walt Disney. I recently heard a story from Tony Baxter who said this truck, and I think from what I've heard also the fire engine, Walt used to come in early before the park opened and he would drive this truck around in the morning and kind of enjoy Disneyland before it was inundated with crowds. Because once people got there, he couldn't walk around like a normal person because everybody wanted his signature and everybody recognized him. So instead, he would kind of use this time in the morning to have his time in the park and drive around the truck. And he made a comment once about his brother, Herbert, who was a United States postal worker, and how he was envious of him and his life because he lived this like simple life, just driving his truck around all the time. And I was like, what an interesting comment for Walt Disney to make, to be envious of someone with such a simple life when he was such an incredible person with this amazing career. But because of his like kind of odd life where he was well known and famous and, did all these things, he didn't live that simple life that he really craved in a lot of ways. So he envied his brother. So I think those mornings when he drove the truck around Disneyland in the morning was kind of his time of getting to live the simple life for a little while. So yeah, grass is always greener. That's a good way of looking at that. Yeah, everybody thinks what everybody else has is better. So comparison is a thief of joy, friends. Just remember that. This truck in 1997, the manager of the Carnation Farms located in Carnation, Washington, and the home of the founder of the Carnation Company, was given the truck for the museum at the farm. So as far as I know, it's restored and repainted and now on display there. And every once in a while they fire it up and drive it around the farm. So it still exists, but it doesn't exist at Disneyland anymore. All right, that is the Carnation truck. We are getting to move on. I didn't show you guys this other map that I have. I'll show you before I start talking about our next topic of this. But this is kind of like a map of what they had for all the stores that were there. And you can see there's a lot. But these are the original stores that were in Main Street when it opened. And a lot of them were smaller mom and pop stores. And the reason for that was they had a really hard time getting people to believe in sponsoring Disneyland because it was never been done before. And nobody really believed it was going to work. So instead they got a lot of little sponsors, but they all helped pay the bills essentially by leasing space on Main Street, USA. And we'll talk a little bit more about sponsors when we get to another one of the stores in here. But you can see where we're at here is West Center Street. It's labeled there on the map. And we're going to talk about number, was that 38 next, which is behind Upjohn's Pharmacy, which we'll get to in a minute. But we're going to talk about the Book and Candle Shop in Disneyland, which was opened from 1955 to 1971-ish, 77. There's not a lot of history out here about this, and it's really hard to nail down an exact date of when it changed. But my best guess is probably 71, because there was a lot of changes happening with Walt Disney World opening, and it affected a lot of things with sponsors and whatnot that happened in Disneyland at that time. So the candle shop is spectacular, and I'm so sad we don't have this anymore. So the idea of Main Street in 1955 is that it would mimic the businesses found in a typical turn-of-the-century American town, right? This is not news for most of you guys, but so at that time, at turn of the century, we're just starting to get, we're starting to get gas, and then electric starts happening, but the mainstay of a lot of houses was still candles. Candles was what you used to light your home. So they would have a candle shop so you could go buy candles for your home. And this candle shop wasn't like your average ordinary candle shop. It was like every color of the rainbow kind of candles. They had an inventory of 75,000 candles, spiraled and chandelier displays of candles as well that you can see here. And to put this in context for those of you who are wondering where this was, if you go in Disneyland today and you go either in like the entrance behind the Fortuosity shop or you walk through the Fortuosity shop to the other side, have you ever wondered why it's like looks like its own little shop? It's now a toy shop with a little train running around the top. Well, that is what this was. It was the candle shop, the book and candle shop. So on one side was candles and the other side was books. And you can see up on the shelf there where the train now runs today, is just a whole bunch of candles stored up there. So it does look like a Hogwarts type candle store. That's it. That's true, Giselle. So they had all kinds of candles. They had ones that were scented candles like coconut and gardenia, grape, lemon, jasmine, and all kinds of other fragrances. They had seasonal candles like Easter bunnies and turkeys, Christmas trees, Halloween pumpkins, Santa Claus, which you can kind of see in this one down there on the shelf. You can see Santa. They also had traditional elegant taper candles, which you see hanging from the ceiling. You can see them here as well. So Jess, this was in Disneyland. It was on the back side of Upjohn Pharmacy, which is now the Fortuosity shop. So the place where the little toy shop is now that has the train that goes around the ceiling, that's what this store was. So yeah, they could make, yep, you can see how it turned into it. Like you can go there now and be like, oh, that's exactly where they put those candles, look based on these pictures. Some of my favorite candles in this were the ones that resembled food. So they have cheeseburger candles, and they had ones that look like ice cream sundaes and cupcakes and ice cream cones and banana splits and all the different kinds that look like food, which I think is really fun. So this was an ad I found from 1956 for the Disneyland candle shop. And it says, Disneyland's candle shop, tulips, turkeys, and mushrooms to burn. And so I'll read just a little bit of this because it's really quite fun. It says, "Good morning. May I help you with something? Yes, I'd like an ice cream soda and a cheeseburger with lettuce, onion, and tomato. Would you like it to go? No, I'll burn it here." A strange conversation, but certainly more so at hamburger stands than candle shops these days. For nearly 2,000 years, candles were man's chief source of artificial light, and for almost the same number of years, candle shops were relegated to specializing in rather unimaginative-looking product, whose sole function was to glow when lighted. Decorative candles were only for the few, novelty candles were almost non-existent, and selection was very limited. That's certainly not the case today in Disneyland's candle shop. Located on West Center Street, just off Main Street, USA, Disneyland's candle shop offers guests a wide variety of candles to choose from, ranging in style from traditional and seasonal to contemporary and novelty, ranging in price from scented votive candles selling at 29 cents a piece to $250 German candle made on a 16th century hand-carved mold. Goes on, but this article actually clips off, and I couldn't find the second page of it, which is such a bummer. But the candles that cost $250, some of those were actually hand-picked by Walt Disney on his travels in Europe. And he would bring them back and he would stock the shop himself. This was a shop that Walt Disney actually insisted on having on Main Street, USA, which is all the more reason why it's very, very sad we don't have it anymore. But he and Lillian had been impressed by all the elaborate candles on a visit to Germany. And so this shop was one of their favorites. This is one they frequented often on Main Street, USA, because it reminded them of all their travels in Europe. So very sad that it is now gone. But what an amazing experience to be able to go and see all the candles in the candle shop there. So you can see here, this looks like just marching band, but I always say if you're looking at historical Disney photos, always look what's in the background, because the background's often way more interesting than what's in the foreground. And if you see that little sign that looks like a book behind the lamppost, that says book and candle shop. So let's talk about the bookshelf, the book side of this shop, because it was only one half of it was candles and the rest was books. I don't have a ton of pictures of this, but this will look really familiar to you if you're used to going to Disneyland now, because if you look kind of like on the side, there's a big chandelier on one side. On the other side, it looks like it's peeking through another area. That's where they have all the stuffed animals now. But you can see all of the different books on racks that are covering the walls, and some are down lower for the kids as well. And this would be the modern day emporium. This would be like the toy shop that's also called the storybook shop, which is appropriate because it's a throwback to the bookshop that was there. So the reason that this is here was because Western Printing, when Western Publishing was a Disneyland sponsor, it was one of the only outside Disneyland sponsors in the beginning. They made a $200,000 investment into Disneyland that in 1952 that equaled to be about 13.8% as an investor. But Western Printing and Lithographing had been in business with Walt Disney since 1933. They had exclusive book rights to all the Walt Disney licensed characters at that point. And then in 1937, Western took over the production and publication of the children's periodical Mickey Mouse Magazine. So very much a partnership for a very, very long time with Walt Disney. Then Western published all kinds of licensed Disney items as well, including, get ready, all right, storybooks, coloring books, tray puzzles, games, kiddie records, stamp books, craft kits, and comic books. So lots and lots of Disney products were created by Western Publishing. So it makes sense for them to then become a sponsor of Disneyland and then also to have a little bookshop that they put in Disneyland. So this was their sponsored shop, was this Western Publishing. They also had books about Disney movies. So they didn't just have like comic books. They had ones that were about 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Bambi, Pinocchio. They had science-related books on physics and natural history and dinosaurs, which essentially like connects it to attractions like Nature's Wonderland, Tomorrowland, Adventure Through Inner Space, the Grand Canyon, the Primeval World. But those books weren't branded for Disney. They were just kind of a tie-in to the ride because they're educational. Which if you think about how Walt Disney really wanted the park to be an educational park, that was when he was thinking of it as Mickey Mouse Park. He wanted it to be not just a place for kids to have fun, but also for them to learn. That's why we're going to have Granny's Farm was going to be there. That's why we had Mineral Hall. We had a museum, Davy Crockett Museum in Frontierland for a while. It was supposed to be very much like living history for the kids and lots of educational opportunities for them. So it makes sense that we would have a lot of the things that we do have in Disneyland and then have all these books also tie into those attractions as well. If you watch the train in the bookshop, it has, if it stops at the little place to get water, like it does, this is a steam train, right? And it stops to get water. And if you watch long enough, like it'll light up like a little Mickey Mouse, like a hidden Mickey on the little water feature. But you have to catch it. I think it's like every fourth time or third time around. And then you can see that happen. So it's a little hidden Mickey you have to wait for. So yeah, it's really cute store, a little toy store. So we've talked about the book and candle shop. We talked about the flower market. We talked about the Carnation truck. I'm not going to get much into the history of Carnation and what everything that happened with the Blue Ribbon Bakery and all the stuff that happened on the other side of the street, just because for lack of time, because this next one is going to take us a little bit to get through, but it's worth it. So now we're going to talk about what was in the front of the candle shop. So this would be the storefront area. And this was actually Upjohn Pharmacy, which a lot of you guys probably have heard about this before if you know anything about Disney history. We're going to go into it like a little deep dive of it real quick. So this was open from July 17th, 1955, so opening day, through September 1970. So again, this was something that was affected by Disney World opening, and we'll get to that in a little bit. There was the idea of having a pharmacy in Disneyland on Main Street, USA, back when Harper Goff was helping him do some early concepts of Main Street, USA. And you can see this is a drugstore and a barber shop. And the thing I want you guys to look really closely at is what's hanging in front of this. You see the little mortar and pestle that is in the front, because that's going to come back later. So keep in mind that was in this original concept art by Harper Goff. Harper Goff did a lot of set design for a lot of things. He also did it for Casablanca. So he was a set designer for that. And he did the Jungle Cruise. He was pretty much in charge of that. And some of my favorite quotes from Harper Goff, he was, Disneyland was built in such a hurry because it was built in a year that every time that they would have the surveyors come out to put stakes in to mark off where buildings should go and streets and everything, the people moving the dirt around would bulldoze over them and they would lose them. So they kept having to have like surveyors come out. It was getting really, really expensive. And so they said, finally, he's like, just eyeball it, Harper Goff. So he's like, Harper, just go eyeball it. So he did. He like eyeballed a lot of things about Main Street, USA. There are some surveyor marks that do exist, like the little like golden spike that's right inside the castle as you pass through it. There's a surveyor mark that used to match one that was down at the end of Main Street to get that sight line really straight. That one they didn't eyeball. But there was a lot of eyeballing that happened. And we've talked about this before in our Jungle Cruise series, how he just pretty much took a stick and just kind of like drew the Jungle Cruise canal, like eyeballing it, and then walked 15 feet this way and like put a stick in. And that was the canal for the Jungle Cruise. It was crazy. Their process was not very organized back in the day. Anyway, sorry, little Harper Goff tangent. So like I said, Walt wanted his parks to not be merely about entertainment, but also about education. So this one also comes into play for this Upjohn Pharmacy, which was not an actual pharmacy. and we'll get into that. But the history of Upjohn, what in the world was Upjohn, is an American pharmaceutical manufacturing firm that was founded in 1886 in Hastings, Michigan by Dr. William E. Upjohn. The company was originally formed to make friable pills, I think is how you say that. And I have a really awesome graphic for you of somebody using their thumb to squish one of these. And that's because they were specifically designed to be easily digested and could be reduced to a powder under the thumb, which is what they used in all of their marketing. So the other things that Upjohn was known for was they developed a process for large-scale production of cortisone, and also together with sharing, biochemically converted cortisone into the more potent steroid prednisone by bacterial fermentation. So they're the ones that are responsible for that. They also developed some really famous drugs like Xanax, Motrin, Rogaine. So big time pharmaceutical company, right? So that's the Upjohn company, but how did it get to Disneyland? How is it connected? Well, the Upjohn Pharmacy in Disneyland was the result of a friendship between Walt Disney and Donald Gilmore. Not Happy Gilmore. Not Emily Gilmore. I'm thinking like all the Gilmores I know. The chairman of the Upjohn Company. So the two of them essentially knew each other from Walt Disney's Smoke Tree Ranch. If you know anything about that, that is his vacation home that he had over in Palm Springs. And he loved it there. He loved going there. And he loved it so much that he had his tie. He had an embroidered tie with STR on it for Smoke Tree Ranch. And if you look at the partner statue in Disneyland or Disney World, you can actually see his tie has an STR on it for Smoke Tree Ranch as well, if you look closely. So the two men had houses that were near each other. They knew each other from this, and they're like, hey, like, you know, let's get together and like help each other out. And they just became like this natural partnership that formed because they knew each other, essentially networking. Walt was doing some networking while he was on vacation. So like I mentioned before, it was not easy for Disney to sell the idea to lessees, to get them to be sponsors of Disneyland in the park. Nobody saw any value in it. And they also thought Disneyland might fail. So they're like, what's the point? Why would I pour a bunch of money into this? There's actually if you know the Santa Fe and Disneyland Railroad, when, you know, you should probably hear that in announcements and things like that. They used to be a big sponsor in Disneyland. They used to have their logo painted on the water towers and the trains and everything else. But when they first approached Santa Fe about it, they said, okay, we'll be $50,000 a year. And then we'll put your logo all these places. And you can also sell train tickets in the park. And the guy was like flabbergasted. He's like, what? Because up to that point, the only money that they had given to sponsor anything was like the cost of the paint to paint the logo on like a kiddie park. Like they didn't even think about giving money to somebody to like put this stuff in the park. Like this was unheard of, and they weren't going to do it. They kind of was like, no, not doing that. But eventually, because it's a long story, CB Wood managed to get a really big contract with Swift. And that kind of like enticed other big businesses to invest in Disneyland. And they did. They eventually gave $50,000 and made it happen. So that's why we had Santa Fe Railroad involved in Disneyland with that. But they had a really hard time. You know, even the companies within themselves had a really hard time explaining to people why this was a valuable investment to put advertising in Disneyland. So there's a magazine called The Overflow from Upjohn. I think it was an internal magazine, a sales magazine from 1955 that really shows and highlights the uncertainty of Disneyland at the time. So I'm just going to read a little bit of this to give you the idea of where these companies were thinking, how they were thinking about Disneyland at the time, which is so different than how we would think of it now. So this says, but Upjohn is in the drug, not the entertainment business, so the inclusion of the company-sponsored drugstore might seem a bit unique and illogical. Our only reason for sponsoring the store is that its presence in Disneyland constitutes sound, inexpensive advertising with exciting possibilities. As Disney reaps the profits of his latest work, Upjohn will get the full advertising value. Furthermore, none of our competitors may sponsor an exhibition unless they either get our permission or sponsor the $1 million Disney TV show. Why does the drugstore constitute good advertising? Of primary importance is the fact that it will be seen by the public. Secondarily, it's inexpensive. Year after year, Disneyland will present the name Upjohn to the public much as an ad in Life presents the company's name. This messaging here, that comes directly from C.V. Wood. That is how he sold this to investors, as he said, people will associate your company with good memories on vacation, and that's why you want to be an investor in Disneyland. Anyway, he said, but an ad in Life, like Life magazine, does the job once. Disneyland does it many times. The cost, once construction is finished, the annual cost will be about the same as one page in an issue of Life. How many people will see Disneyland? Present estimates indicate that 6 million people will see Disney's Fairyland every year. Obviously, lots more than what they originally thought. It's a new form of advertising, but board chairman Donald Gilmore and advertising manager Jack Gauntlet have expressed enthusiasm concerning it. All of the sponsors in Disneyland will be top flight companies. So this is really them trying to explain to people like why we're doing this Disneyland thing, because it was weird. And everyone's like, I don't know about this. I don't know how we feel. So we're just gonna we're gonna explain to you why this is a good investment, even though I'm not even sure they were 100% convinced, but they're like trying to convince themselves of it. So they've been convinced now to invest in Disneyland. The original cost they agreed to pay was $29,600 to set up a factory showroom inside Disneyland's Main Street USA in their storefront space. They also were going to pay $20 per square foot to lease space on Main Street USA, and that was true of a lot of the businesses there on Main Street, except for the ones that also had to pay additional kickbacks to C.V. Wood through his associate. Which is a whole nother story, which we went into that one on the Disneyland Scandals Distorian's Lounge a little while ago. So that's out there if you want to hear more of that story. The final rented cost, though, turned out to be a little bit more expensive than they planned, which these things always do, at $37,720, significantly over the initial estimate. The pharmacy, though, was a detailed recreation of a late 1800s, early 1900s, so turn of the century apothecary shop. Disney initially designed the interior, as it did for other lessees, but Upjohn wasn't too fond of it. So I do have some pictures of the original WED designs of the shop to see what it could have looked like. It definitely had it had these checkered floors, and it had some poles in there. It definitely was very Victorian-esque in its appearance. I have so many of these. You can see some display cases are there as well. And so it definitely looks like very much anything you would find on Main Street USA that would just blend in with the other shops. But Upjohn was not happy with that. They were like, no, because Disney's design did not reflect the layout of old-time drugstores. And they said, this isn't accurate. This isn't period accurate. And if we're going to do this and we're going to pay all this money, we want to make it period accurate. So what they did instead is Upjohn was like, look, your guys are great and all that, but they're like, this is not what we have planned for this, because it needs to be accurate if we're this big pharmaceutical company and we're trying to do this turn of the century thing. So they actually brought in their own designer, someone who was contracted with them. It was a renowned graphic designer named Will Burton. He looked like this. Jump scare. But this guy worked with them. He was contracted with them for a magazine that they were doing. I want to say it was called Scope Magazine, but he's a famous graphic designer that did, yes, it's Scope, here it is, and Fortune as well. But his work was commented on as being modernist inflected work that changed everything about the way that graphic design was both considered and made in the U.S. So Will Burton was no small potatoes. He was like a big deal designer, and they brought him in, and they said, okay, can you design the shop based on these 3 New York pharmacies that were in existence before 1886? So that was the design that they decided to go off of, was those instead, which was more historically accurate. So they did that, and they did this layout, and I actually have the floor plan for it, which is really fun, that you can see. Because if you go in there today, a lot of this still exists in pretty much the same way that it was. And you can even see where the entrances were and the passages were to, they had this modern display room in the back as well, which we'll get into in a little bit. But obviously the counters are a little bit different than they used to be, because they have new display tables and things in there now, but the shape of the room is still there. If you go in now, it's the Fortuosity shop. So outside, they did hang something that, remember, we talked about with Harper Goff's work. This is what the outside of the building looked like. And it said Upjohn Pharmacy, and it had all these display windows. But if you look in the corner, there is this giant stained glass mortar and pestle that lit up. You know, interestingly enough, it wasn't there on opening day. And we'll get to why. But you can see it's hanging up there in the corner of the shop. And the reason that it's there is because back in the day, there was people who maybe didn't have as much education, who were illiterate, who couldn't read. And so they had a lot of their shops have symbols outside to show what the place was so that people could find it even if they couldn't read. So they had, for pharmacies, they would have something that was like a mortar and pestle, or they would have something called a show globe, which is a clear glass vessel filled with colored liquid and then displayed in the window or hung from outside it. This is where we get barber poles from. So if you ever wondered why they have those barber poles everywhere, so people know that that's where you get the, we've talked about this before on Distory, but that's why we have that. And also, if you have 3 gold balls, they represent a pawn shop as well. So there's lots of these different symbols that they had, that they used, back in the day when people just couldn't read as much as they do now. This is what the mortar and pestle look like up close. So you can see it's kind of this blue stained glass, and then it would light up at night. And then these are what they call the show jars or show globes, depending on who you ask. But you can also see a mortar and pestle that's kind of fancy down there at the bottom. But you can see that they're meant to be like attached to the outside of the building to show that this is indeed an apothecary. So it was to let people know that they were there. The show globes also, this is what they look like in the window of Upjohn. And it was just essentially glass jars filled with liquid. But if you ever see those, they're just supposed to symbolize a pharmacy. That's all it is. They're really pretty. There's all kinds of them too that were in the Upjohn Pharmacy. So inside the shop, the items were collected by Dr. A. Gerard MacLeod. And he was a physician who worked for Upjohn, but he had a passion for medical antiques. That was his thing. We like Disney history. He likes medical antiques. That is his jam. And so he got this project where he was going to go and collect all these medical antiques. Now, if I listed all of them, we would be here all night. So as much as I love to be super highly detailed, that might have to be its own episode someday of all of them. But I will talk about a couple. They had over 1,000 antiques in this shop. And it was basically a museum to the pharmacy trade. It wasn't a working museum. It wasn't a working pharmacy. It was just a museum. But it was pretty amazing. So in the months leading up to the park's opening, Upjohn purchased hundreds of fabulous pharmaceutical antiques to display in its pharmacy. All of them were authentic, many international in origin, and some dating back several centuries. So they were not brand new. These were actually authentic antiques. So they had a stove from 1900 that was found in New Jersey. The leaded glass chandeliers that you see at the top came from the attic of a Kalamazoo druggist who bought them in the 1890s and used them in his shop until 1918. So get this, these chandeliers that are at the top, I think I actually have a picture of the original pharmacy that they were used in. So this is amazing. Look at, see them at the top? Same ones. That's where they originally came from. They also had a collection of antique microscopes from the 1700s that were purchased from a New York collector. They had syringes dating from 1850. They had an 1840s pharmacist balance, and then they had a bust of Hippocrates, which was up in the shelf. I think I showed you here. You can see him up there. which is originally from a personal collection of Dr. Upjohn himself, which is also, it's a black Wedgwood bust that's circa 1800 of the 3rd century physician Hippocrates, who is the author of the Oath of Ethics that is still taken by all of the medical graduates today. I think it's what, first do no harm, I believe, but I'm not a Hippocrates expert. But I believe that's what it is. They had something really, really interesting on the counter of Upjohn Pharmacy, and that would be some live leeches. So if you're squeamish, I'm going to be really careful of how I phrase all this stuff because I went down the rabbit hole with leeches. So they still sell leeches today, but these ones were live leeches that they got from the famous Distorian leech farms that are in Europe. That's what it says on the sign at the bottom. So leeches are used for bloodletting, which is sometimes called leech therapy or hirudotherapy, I think is how you pronounce that. Used for virtually every illness back in the day: fever, inflammation, infection, headache, epilepsy, hysteria, and even mental disorders. They believed that bloodletting would help. Yeah, and they are still used in hospitals today. It's kind of made a comeback from what I've seen. It dates back to the Stone Age, the practice of using leeches, where they believed evil spirits inhabiting the human body were believed to cause various illnesses. Hence, blood withdrawal was considered an effective treatment. So you would get out all of those evil spirits with the leeches. The popularity of medicinal leeching reached its peak in the 18th and 19th centuries. About 80 million leeches were used annually in France, Russia, and England at that time. And also, side note, Walt Disney did refer to the businesses that sprang up around Disneyland as leeches. And I wonder if his terminology of that, I know it was kind of just trendy to say it also, but I wonder if it also had to do with the fact that, you know, he saw these in Upjohn Pharmacy rather frequently. So, I don't know. There was a Disneyland pamphlet that I am not going to read to you guys because it's like 16-page pamphlet about that they would hand you when you'd go there. They gave information about everything that was in the store. And I do have the whole thing, but I'm not going to read it to you all. I am going to read you just a very short section of it just to give you a little bit of context. Here's the Dapper Dans inside the Upjohn Pharmacy back in the day. But here's what the Disneyland pamphlet said. It said, the list of exhibits is a long one. Earthenware candlesticks shaped like lions from an 1850 French pharmacy, leech glasses from the days when leeches were used to draw blood from infected areas of the body, French and Spanish porcelain pharmacy jars from European prescription counters of 1850 and 1875, and herbs, barks, extracts, powders, granules, and grindings of all descriptions. All this, plus the skill and knowledge of the druggist, tells the story of pharmacy in the 19th century. It is the story of many lives saved and of man's constant search for better health. Adding to the realism of the scene, registered pharmacists in clothing of the period are on duty to answer questions from visitors. Upjohn's old-fashioned drugstore is not a retail outlet for pharmaceuticals. It is a museum, a living tribute to the rich heritage of the American druggist. So if you remember, I said that this was not 100% done at opening day. There was on the outside, it was missing its little chandelier. And then also on the inside, a lot of the things were just not done. So I have a memorandum that's from C.D. Wood, who we've been talking about. He became the vice president of Disneyland, really instrumental in getting Disneyland built, but definitely shady character. But as of June 2nd, 1955, remember, Disneyland opened in July 17th. So this is a little bit more than a month earlier. He sent an inter-office memorandum to Walt Disney regarding the best estimates that could be obtained at the time regarding the status of individual sections of the park on opening day. So he's kind of like giving Walt Disney a report of what's happening. So for building 307, which is Upjohn, that's this one, he said to Walt Disney, the construction of the walls and fixtures will be complete. A lot of the props are here now. We do not know if this is all there is to come, and if not, if all will be here for opening. So he's like, I don't think we're going to make it, is essentially what that is. By the night of July 16th, so the night before Disneyland opened, the 1480 square foot Upjohn Pharmacy was still not finished. One store employee recollected that nails were still being driven into walls past midnight before Disneyland's opening day. This was very common virtually everywhere in Disneyland. There, like, nothing was done. Nothing. It was chaos that night. Some exhibits were missing little details like pills inside bottles. So, like, the inside just really wasn't done yet. So opening day of Disneyland, the Upjohn Pharmacy, they got tickets for their employees. So this is what they look like. It says, with compliments of the Upjohn Company, this admission good at any time during Disneyland's regular operating hours. So this one's a child ticket for 75 cents through the main gate, but they gave them some special passes also to get in to the park for opening day. And it was 80 of them. The ribbon cutting ceremony, though, was the next day in front of the Upjohn drugstore. And 2 ribbons were cut, one by Fred Allen and the other by a retail associate. They is unnamed. So I have a little bit of an account from a guest who was there and experienced this pharmacy. And this is what they had to say about it. Mom was always afraid I would knock over the fragile glass bottles. This was the next shop in the sequence as you pass through the candle shop and bookstore. There was a little display in the glass case in front of the street window showing Chinese remedies. They had a little ivory figurine of a reclining woman, not fully clothed. This prop was used by Chinese doctors to diagnose their female patients who were too shy to be examined. The ladies pointed to the parts of the figurine where they had their ailment. He said, Mom did not approve of the little unclothed statue, but Dad told her to relax. Is it more prudish to disrobe for the doctor or to have an always unclothed figure? So, I could not find any pictures of this, and I really, really wanted to, and I'm super bummed that I couldn't. I'm not sure I could even show it if I did, but I haven't found it yet. I have found some other, like, window displays and things, but they're just jars and glass jars and things, but kind of an interesting little detail from someone who was there. The store also had a separate backroom exhibit, which I mentioned before. So I showed you the other layout. This shows you a really good idea of where the shops were. So if you're looking at this, to give you a little bit of context, this is where you would enter from Main Street USA on the corner. Okay, so you go into the building. And then the exhibit we're going to talk about is here. This is the exhibit, but this is also... So if you've ever been in that, like, kind of weird jewelry store that's in a very odd shape, it's kind of like where this exhibit was. And then you can see the candle shop and the Western printing bookshop that's behind it as well. This separate backroom exhibit showcased present-day Upjohn and information about the company and its products. And it opened later than 1955. This actually opened in 1958 or 59. It's kind of hard to nail down exactly when it opened. I do have a couple pictures of it, though. So these are these kids learning about this pharmaceutical company, which is, it is what it is. But they also had these little rotating displays. And to my knowledge, these don't exist anymore. They kind of just disappeared. But this is what the modern section behind it look like. And so that would be what's in that little jewelry store that you can walk in and find all the earrings and necklaces and whatnot in the Fortuosity shop. That's what you're walking into when you go to that. So the staff there, we mentioned before, there's a staff of 2 pharmacists and 2 clerks that manned the shop. And they were, it wasn't a working pharmacy, so they didn't actually have to prescribe or dole out anything. They don't prescribe there, obviously, because they're pharmacists, but they didn't have to give any medicine to anybody necessarily. But they were there to answer questions about the pharmaceutical trade. Another reason that the shop didn't actually sell any pharmaceuticals was because it didn't want to be in conflict with the local pharmacies. So the 2 pharmacists were named Frederick August Eckstein and Philip Milton Harvey, and they hung out in period costumes. I have some nice little pictures of them here. And then the women were the store clerks. There's Betty Lou Foley and Juanita Eloise Goodwin. What would you get when you went to the Upjohn Pharmacy? If you know Disney history, you're probably already aware that what you would get were vitamins. So you got a little pamphlet, a little postcard, and then you'd also get this bottle of free vitamins. It was a square miniature glass bottle of orange-colored Unicat vitamins, and inside it was inside a red box with a white silhouette of Disneyland's castle logo, and it also had a pamphlet that stated a souvenir of Disneyland Upjohn with the history of Upjohn in it. The bottle is about 1.5 inches tall and contained 12 vitamins with an expiration date, for your safety. Often park advertisements elsewhere, I've seen this, that would remind people to stop by and get their free vitamins at Upjohn. So this was like a nod, like, hey, like don't forget to go get your vitamins. And there's a story from a cast member that said, for a number of years while working at the park, I would stop into the Upjohn Pharmacy and get small glass containers of free vitamins that were handed out to guests. Still have a couple of the empties to this day. The vitamins were free and the family used them. And then I have something from a guest that said, I remember the vitamin pill samples they would give away, the little orange balls in the square glass bottle. I would refill the bottle when I got home, but with chalks instead of Upjohn. And I had to look up chalks because I was like, I don't know what those are. Chalks is kind of like the multivitamins of the day. So they look like this in their own glass jars. But yeah, most magical pharmacy on earth indeed. The pharmacy also hosted traveling scientific exhibits. So every once in a while they would have something educational there that was beyond just what they would have normally. The Disney and Upjohn partnership ended after Walt passed away and the connection was lost. But there's a little bit more to the story than that. Disney also wanted to own more of its shops and spaces. And they also were moving in a new sponsor. And so that is partially why that ended. You can still see a lot of these artifacts from Disneyland. They have not disappeared. If you are in Arizona, you're in luck. You can go to the University of Arizona, and they have this History of Pharmacy Museum. And all these pieces that used to be in Disneyland are actually there now. Now, the chandeliers that are hanging from the ceiling, the ones that I told you about from the 1800s, those are the ones from Disneyland. But my understanding is this is a recreation of the original mortar and pestle stained glass one and not the original. But you can see a lot of the pieces there if you go and visit. Like you can see all these little jars from the 1860s. So it's not totally gone. You can still go visit it. It is at the University of Arizona. So what happened to the Upjohn Pharmacy? Well, it's going to get moved out, right? So it's getting kicked out because there's a new sponsor in town, which is the New Century Timepieces. So that is what moves in to this space, and that was by the Elgin Watch Company, which made a lot of these Mickey watches and things. And so the sign out front at this point, this is 1972, but it actually was a contract they signed in 1971 with Walt Disney World on their Main Street to be the official manufacturer of timepieces sold in Walt Disney World. And so because of that contract, it was just time. They just ended this partnership. They moved them into Disneyland at the same time. And this is the new norm. So they took down that beautiful mortar and pestle chandelier, and they put up a timepiece instead that looks like a clock that is hanging out on the corner. That partnership with Elgin and the New Century Clock Shop ended in 1986, and then New Century Timepieces became the new store, and that was the Loris took over that sponsorship in 1986. So until their sponsorship ended in 2009, it was essentially like clock and watch shop in this space. And that's when Disney was like, we're just having our own merch in here now. So we're just going to turn it into the Fortuosity Shop, which is named after a song from The Happiest Millionaire, which I believe is the last live action Walt Disney worked on before he passed away. It just became part of the Emporium, essentially. The Emporium ate it, like it did all of these small shops. Just like Walt Disney World, how the Emporium ate West Center Street doesn't exist anymore. There used to be a few remnants from Upjohn's Pharmacy that were there. I heard that there is some sort of hanging sign somewhere on Main Street that says like RX, the prescription sign drugs. RX is the Latin word for recipe, meaning to take. So that's where that comes from, in case you're curious. But it's supposed to be somewhere, but I haven't found it yet. So scavenger hunt. I'm going to look in May, see if I can find it. There used to be the windows that were above the Fortuosity shop did have a callback to the Upjohn Pharmacy for quite some time. There was 2 windows with names on them. One said D.S. Gilmore, M.D. and E.G. Upjohn, M.D. So that was the former Upjohn president, Donald S. Gilmore. Happy Gilmore to Walt's friend. And then also Ernest Guilford Upjohn was the grandson of one of the Upjohn Company's 3 founders, grandnephew of he was just all connected. And he became the vice president and the medical director and then eventually president and their chairman. So he was very much connected in the Upjohn community. And the other window that was nearby is this one that said C.D. Patterson, who started his career with Upjohn as a traveling sales representative and became vice president, and then W. Fred Allen, who was also a salesman and later promoted to vice president. Now, these windows, I have to double check that one of these might still be there, but I haven't looked at them in a while. And I realized, like, in my pictures, I was like, this one definitely isn't there anymore because this is what's there, because they honored Dave Smith, who was the founder of the Walt Disney Archives. So it says New Century Historical Society. So they replaced that window to honor Dave Smith as a Disney legend. So that window did disappear with that. I have to see if the other one on the other side is still there, but I would imagine that they removed that one as well. There's not really that much left except for the layout of the store. Potentially some sort of prescription sign somewhere. So if anybody finds it, please let me know because I haven't found it yet. But beyond that, that is the Upjohn Pharmacy. And it's a wild ride of a medical history on Main Street, USA. Thank you, everybody, for joining me for this episode of the Distorians Lounge. I hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit of history of the unique things on West Center Street in Disneyland and maybe learned a thing or two along the way. Next week, we'll be back for our 100th episode of Distory. Can you believe that? And Kirk will hopefully be back with me at that point as well. And we'll bring you some unique celebrations in Disney history that you might not have heard of before to celebrate our 100 episodes. But until then, thank you for being with me for this episode and hanging out in the Distorians Lounge. And we will see you next time.